All right, welcome back. We're going to continue with our exploration of Chapter 3. Here we're going to be looking at Concept 3.2, and this is the four emergent properties of water contribute to Earth's suitability for life. Okay, so if you remember last time, we kind of concluded with this idea that water's polar nature and its ability to form hydrogen bonds leads to cohesive behavior, ability to moderate temperature, expansion upon freezing, and versatility as a solvent. So let's break these down and talk about what we mean by them and why they're important. So let's start off with cohesion of water molecules. So collectively, those hydrogen molecules hold those water molecules together. This is a phenomenon called cohesion. Okay? One of the things that cohesion can do is can help transport water against gravity in plants. Okay? Another related principle here is adhesion, and this is the attraction between different substances. So in this case, for plants, between water and the plant cell walls. So let's look at this graphically. Here we have a tree. We have the tree's roots, its trunk, and its leaves. The tree is going to draw water from the ground through its roots, and it's going to transport it up to those leaves. It does that by these small channels that occur within the trunk and within the branches. And what happens inside of there is we have water molecules that have the ability of adhering to the sides of those walls through hydrogen bonds. And then in addition to that, that water can link to itself as well. So this combination of adhesion and cohesion helps draw the water upwards and distributes it to the rest of the plant. Another related issue is this idea of surface tension. So surface tension is a measure of how hard it is to break the surface of a liquid. Okay? Water has an unusually high surface tension due to this hydrogen bonding. And this is particularly true at the air-water interface. You can kind of imagine that those molecules that are at the surface can hydrogen bond with the water below it, but it can't really hydrogen bond with the air above it. So the molecules at the surface tend to be more locked in and secured than the water immediately below it. So another way of phrasing this is the water that is at this air-water interface has more structure. Consequently, when something lands on it and presses on it, it gives a little bit of resistance. Okay? This resistance is enough that the spider or other aquatic insects can actually float on the surface of the water. All right, so that's the first thing, the cohesion of water. Let's move on to the second, which is moderation of temperature by water. Okay? So water can absorb heat from warm air, and conversely, that water can release that heat into cooler air. Because of these hydrogen bonds, water can absorb and release very large amounts of heat with only a slight change in its own temperature. Okay? And we'll discuss why that happens here. But first, we have to kind of go back and reconnect with the concepts of energy. So remember, energy is the ability to make something happen. We talked about it before in terms of kinetic, or in terms of potential energy. Kinetic energy is when that energy is actually being used. So this is the energy of motion. When we talk about kinetic energy associated with the random movements of atoms or molecules, we call this thermal energy. So molecules that are sitting around aren't just static, they're actually shaking all about. And if they shake slowly, it's because they have a little bit of thermal energy. If they shake a lot, it's because they have a lot of thermal energy. Temperature is simply a measure of that energy. Okay, so When something is hot, there's lots of movement. When something is cool, there's less movement. Okay? Now, thermal energy, when it is transferred from one body to another body, we refer to that as heat. Okay, so when water or when heat or when this thermal energy goes from water into the air, that is a transfer of heat. Now, let's skip a few slides there because it's not really relevant to us. Now let's talk about water itself in that it has a very high specific heat. Okay. So specific heat is defined as the amount of heat that it takes to change 1 gram of that substance by 1 degree Celsius. So if we have 1 gram of water, how much heat or energy does it take to make it raise up 1 degree Celsius? And for water, it is 1. And it just so happens to be 1 because we defined a specific heat relative to water. And it just so happens that water has a very high specific heat. Other liquids have much, much lower, far less than 1. Now, let's think about why that might be. Okay, so when you think about water and how it's hydrogen bonded to each other, recognize that a single water molecule in a body of water may have 4 hydrogen bonds, or it may have 3 hydrogen bonds. Every once in a while, it may only have 2 hydrogen bonds. Okay? When we break hydrogen bonds, that requires the absorption of heat. When we form those hydrogen bonds, heat is released. Okay? So the formation and release of these hydrogen bonds only occurs through transfer of heat between these different molecules. Okay? It's a transfer of energy. So the fact that we can have several hydrogen bonds that an individual molecule can break or form, it can hold large amounts of temperature or lots of thermal energy, okay, without actually changing the overall temperature of the entire body. So let's think about how this plays out. So one issue here is in the something that we call evaporative cooling. So as you probably know, evaporation is when something that is liquid turns into a gas. So you spill some water, the floor is wet, you give it an hour or so, and the floor is then dry because all that liquid water has turned into water vapor and is now in the atmosphere. Okay? There's a measure, heat of vaporization, that is the amount of heat that is necessary to convert a particular amount of water or any substance from a liquid to a gas. So, as liquids evaporate, its remaining surface cools. Okay, and this is called evaporative cooling. This is important to us because that allows us to sweat and cool our bodies down. Okay? Another way this comes into play is evaporative cooling of water helps stabilize its temperatures around bodies of water. Okay? So let's stop and look at this graphically again. Here we have a droplet of water. They are all connected through hydrogen bonds. Over here, we have a water molecule that is in gas form. So it does not have these hydrogen bonds. It is broken free and escaping out. So if we have this water molecule here, which just so happens to have 3 hydrogen bonds, we have to give that molecule enough energy to break all three of those hydrogen bonds. Okay? That requires a lot more thermal input or more energy transfer than if there were no hydrogen bonds here. Okay, so things that don't have hydrogen bonds tend to evaporate very rapidly. Now, this has an effect on global temperatures. So here is a map showing average coldest temperature, or the coldest temperature in a typical winter. And you can see here that around North and South Dakota and Montana, it gets very, very cold. More pink equals more cold. Oranger colors means that it's more warm. Notice here that you get this stretching along the coast. And even though up here around Seattle, it is at a very high latitude, equivalent to over here, it is much, much warmer. And that is because the water, the ocean next to it, is holding a lot of stored thermal energy. Consequently, if you look at the globe as a whole, we are mostly a water planet. Consequently, we can retain a lot of heat within the Earth itself. Okay? Think about this in terms of winter and summer cycling. When it's winter up here, the water is releasing heat, keeping it warmer than it should be. And down here, the water is absorbing a lot of heat, keeping the southern hemisphere from being less hot than it should be. And as we go around the sun, those reverse, and the opposite is true as well. We're going to stop there, and we will pick up again with the next video. Part 2 in the series.